Good evening, everybody. Is this thing working? Yes. All right. Well, I'm Matt Cartwright, and we're going to do a town hall, and hopefully we all get out of here before the clouds open up on us. What I like to do is I like to spend about 10 minutes at the beginning and remind you of the services that we provide in case we can be of some use to you as constituents of ours. And what I have is a little PowerPoint to run through the kinds of things that we do, and April, give us the first one. Okay, we have a specialist on veterans and military affairs, and that's Sabrina McLaughlin. She sits in our Pottsville office. She's terrific, and she really digs in to help veterans and active duty military families sort out problems with the VA administration and with the military. One of my favorite things is military medal requests. 5 times now I've been able to, on behalf of the President of the United States, it's been my honor to award service decorations that members of the military earned but never received. And you can't believe how emotional these things get. When I gave Private First Class Joe Scheckman his Bronze Star for Valor for running messages as the Panzers were crashing through the forest at the Battle of the Bulge. Joe Scheckman was from, he went to school in Wilkes-Barre and he ran track. He was really fast. In fact, his nickname was the Hebrew Hurricane. And they still call him that in the Army. He was with the 106th Infantry, about 5 clicks north of Bastogne, when General McAuliffe was surrounded. We have General Anthony McAuliffe Highway not too far from here. That's named after him. What did he say to the Germans when they wanted him to surrender? Nuts. Nuts. It was the same time. At that time, Private First Class Joe Scheckman was running messages through the forest for the Signal Corps. And because of that, he was awarded the Bronze Star for Valor. He also got the Purple Heart and the Combat Infantryman's Badge, which if you ever see anybody wearing one of these, it's a long rectangular thing with a blue background and a silver rifle on it, and that's all it is. But if you see somebody wearing that, thank them, because they were under fire protecting your liberty. The Combat Infantryman's Badge. And I could go on about the other times we've done it, but the moral of the story is if you know somebody who was in service and did not get their service decorations, I want to know about it, because we're going to bird dog that. We're going to find those for them and go through another one of those wonderful ceremonies. And of course, the VA provides a lot of different services. They have a lot of programs. And like any other big organization, whether it's in the public sector or the private sector, they make mistakes. And that's one thing we're here to help correct. They do have congressional liaison officers at the VA, and so we can't necessarily change the result, but we can bump things up to the top of the pile so you get an answer faster. Okay? Your favorite federal agency is the IRS. There are basically 24 major federal agencies, and anytime you have a dispute or a problem or a misunderstanding with any of them that you think we can help, don't be bashful. Call us up. We're on the website, and we have a specialist that can help. Bob Morgan, my district director, sits in Scranton. He's got a fair amount of experience working with the IRS congressional liaison. The one thing to remember, if you don't remember anything else about the IRS from tonight, if the IRS thinks that you owe them money, time is not your friend. Because it could be a little bit of money, but if you let the time go, it turns into interest and penalties, and it gets higher and higher and higher. And then sometimes the only thing we can do is try to negotiate down the interest and penalties a little bit. But we're here to help, so that if you think we can help, give us a call. USCIS, United States Customs, Citizenship and Immigration Services. There are all kinds of different issues that arise with immigration services or things that happen abroad. Suppose you have grandchildren one of whom is born abroad and you don't have the proper birth certificate. We can help out with these things. Let's go to the next one, April. One of the State Department, and we have Ann Lauritzen here. Stand up and wave hello, Ann. Mrs. Lauritzen is a wizard with the State Department and Immigration Services, and one of the most frequent things that comes up is a passport renewal. So many people go on cruises, and the travel agent forgot to tell them to check and make sure their passport is up to date. And then they call us up and they say, I'm going on a cruise, I need my passport in a hurry. Oh, when's the boat leaving? 36 hours from now. And believe it or not, Mrs. Lauritzen has pulled some rabbits out of hats for these people. It may involve a little bit of pain, like they may have to go to 6 and Market in Philadelphia at 6 o'clock in the morning. But, you know, you get what you get. Social Security. This is a program that I have vowed to support and defend as your member of Congress because there are so many people that depend on it. I have 6 counties in my district. I have half of Northampton. The only county I have all of is Schuylkill County. There are 150,000 people in Schuylkill County, and fully 38,000 of them are dependent on Social Security, either old age retirement benefits or disability. And what that means is that it's a hugely important program. And in Washington, I work on ways to strengthen it and preserve it and make sure it's there. And in the district, we work on making sure it works for the people. Statistics show that about 40% of the people that are on Social Security old age retirement benefits, they are existing on that as their only source of support. Now, the average monthly benefit is about $1,305 a month. So if somebody who's living on that, you know they're living hand to mouth, and you know that if they miss a check, that's a hardship. That's an emergency. So if you know somebody that's going through that, please let us know. We are ready, willing, and able to dive in on that. And Krista Mekadon in our Scranton office specializes in that. She does a wonderful job. I don't want to let too much more time go by before I recognize the terrific mayor of Easton, standing in the back, Sal Panto. One of the things that Sal is really good at is working on economic development. I just told him if all the mayors in my district were like Sal, I wouldn't have to work very hard. But economic development means jobs, and jobs is what our district needs more of. And I'm always thinking about how do we increase jobs, and it doesn't have to be a formal thing. It can be me going to visit a factory and asking the factory owners, what do you need to expand? What's holding you back? And a lot of times the answer is, well, we don't have enough vocational schools around here. And then I go and meet with the vocational schools, and none of this is like official congressional business, but as a member of Congress, you have this what they call convening power, and I use it, and I think it's my duty. But one of the things that I can directly affect is federal grant money. Now, federal grant money, anybody ever hear the term earmarks? Okay. Well, earmarks, it kind of has a negative connotation, doesn't it? And why is that? Well, everybody remember the bridge to nowhere?
Yes.
That was in Alaska, and it really, really happened. It's not just a myth. There was a very powerful congressman by the name of Don Young. He's still in Congress. Cantankerous old guy. I love him. And I'll tell you stories about him another time. But he had the power to get earmarks to build a bridge in Alaska that didn't go anywhere. But he just wanted the job, so they built the bridge. Now that's ridiculous. And it makes the whole system look bad. And it made it look so bad, they got rid of earmarks. Now, earmarks is congressionally directed funding. And what that means is the member of Congress looks around his or her district and talks to the municipal leaders and figures out what are the worthy projects they want to support. And then they write the check. That's all gone by the wayside about 6 years ago. But the spending still happens. Discretionary federal spending still happens. And so economic development grants still happen. It's just that they go through the executive branch. And they go through the agencies. And so the Commerce Department has economic development grants. This is a big topic right now because, believe it or not, in the latest proposed budget out of the White House, they propose eliminating economic development grants. I'm on the Appropriations Committee. I just had the chance to question Wilbur Ross, who is the new Secretary of Commerce, and I tried to bring home to him the short-sightedness of that kind of policy, because this is jobs we're talking about, and the federal government is able to affect the creation of jobs, and I say where we can, we should be doing that. And let's go back to the last one, please. Another thing that I do is I have a mayor's conference, and as I say, not everybody's like Mayor Panto. There are, in fairness, some of them are part-time. Many of them have very small townships and cities that they're mayors of, and so they need help learning about the federal programs that you can apply for grant money from. And that's why we have a mayor's conference every year. We just had it about 3 weeks ago at Northampton Community College. And what we try to do is even out the knowledge among all of the municipal leaders so that they know what federal grant programs they can apply for. And then once they do apply for it, we kind of bird dog those applications as they go through the executive branch, make sure that the agencies know that we're behind those grants. And we've had some successes along the way. Well, we just did an assistance to firefighters grant for the City of Easton Fire Department. And I hope that's going to make the firemen and women a lot safer as they run into burning buildings, which is their job. But that's just one example. So, and a whole litany of other kinds of casework that we do. If you have a problem with black lung benefits, student loans, post office, Fannie Mae, TSA, HUD. HUD, we had a housing project in Wilkes-Barre that was really going downhill. And they had a landlord with a terrible attitude. They were code violations everywhere, broken windows, doors that didn't lock. It was a bad situation, and it was leading to an attitude that anything goes here, and it was becoming crime-ridden. When we saw that HUD found HUD violations there, that raised a red flag. It gave us a federal issue, and we went in and we formed a task force among community and business leaders and religious leaders in Wilkes-Barre, and we got on that landlord like white on rice. And that landlord had enough of us and packed up and sold the place and left. And thank God they sold it. This was somebody in New York City that was putting up signs saying, "Come live in Pennsylvania, in the country." I mean, just to fill up the Section 8 housing. It was ridiculous. And we were so glad to get rid of that guy. And it was wonderful because he sold it to a corporation in Atlanta that had a good track record of turning around problem low-income housing developments. We have more work to do there. And crime is not, has not come to an end in Wilkes-Barre, but so far I'm satisfied with the way that has gone. FEMA, flooding issues, EEOC issues, a whole range. Think about all the ways the federal government might interact with you. If you're having a problem, get a hold of us. Okay, and of course, we have an operation down in D.C. If you ever have the chance to come visit, I wish you would. Not enough people come visit me in Washington. I wait by the phone, nobody calls, right?
You're too busy quoting other people.
Okay, and who's collecting the cards? I want to introduce everybody to my communications director, Mrs. Colleen Egan Garrity, who will now hand me the selections. All right. And what I'd like to do is get through all the written questions before we take questions from the floor. Regarding health care, why do the hospitals have so much money to put up more hospitals and urgent care facilities if they are not making too much money, which comes from us and higher premiums and high deductibles? Okay. Obviously, some hospitals do better than other hospitals. I used to be on a community hospital board of directors. I was on there for about 7 years, and believe me, it takes about 7 years to learn healthcare finance. And what I learned was that there's an awful lot of uninsured care that gets doled out. You know, hospitals have a duty under the law to treat people and stabilize them, at least, to come to the emergency room. And that was really a big impetus for the institution of the Affordable Care Act, because hospitals were going under. We're here in the 17th Congressional District of Pennsylvania, and in 2012, before the Medicaid expansion was accepted in Pennsylvania, we lost 2 community hospitals. This was real. I'll tell you the names. Marion Community Hospital in Carbondale, and St. Catherine's Hospital in Fountain Springs, just outside of Ashland in Schuylkill County. And my attitude was, gosh, you could have the best healthcare policy in the world, but if your local hospital goes kaput and all of a sudden it's a 40-minute ride to the nearest emergency room, that's a real tangible difference in your healthcare. And that's one of the reasons I supported the ACA. Now, the ACA is not perfect. I'm the first one to tell you that. And there are high deductibles and there are high premiums. And there are winners and losers under that system. But my attitude is, let's come together. Let's stop this political bomb throwing about the health care. This is people's lives we're talking about here. It shouldn't be a political football. We ought to come together and work out how to smooth off the rough edges of the way it is now. That's my attitude about that. Why can't Congress enact legislation to move from their Cadillac medical bill and go on the ACA to, you got to be a pharmacist to read this one, to set something and give the American people confidence the ACA is the way to go. Okay, so I'm guessing that the reference to Cadillac medical bill, either that's the Cadillac tax, or a reference to members of Congress having a Cadillac health care plan. I can tell you from my own part, as I decided to support the ACA, I decided to go on the ACA myself. So my family and I are on that. I don't know how long they're going to keep me in Congress, but I don't intend to be a hypocrite, and I don't want to let anybody say I am. And it's kind of expensive, actually, because I have to get covered in D.C. and also at home in Lackawanna County. But again, and I agree. I think that members of Congress should have what's available to everybody else. Now, if the question is about the Cadillac tax, that is one of the pay-fors for the healthcare system, and I'm for repealing the Cadillac tax. What that does is it basically hurts members of unions that bargain for pretty good healthcare benefits. And the idea is, well, we're going to tax that as income and use that money to help pay for the whole system. I don't like this idea of singling out groups. I don't even like the medical device manufacturing tax. That's another pay-for ACA. I don't like that either, and I've said I'd be for repealing that as well. That actually hurts some manufacturers right here in the Lehigh Valley. And again, I don't like this idea of singling out folks to kind of punish because of the ACA. What solutions do you favor to provide relief to those suffering under Obamacare? Okay, so again, Obamacare is the same thing as the Affordable Care Act, and most people know that. And again, there are people that are kind of caught in the cracks. So people that make a little bit too much money to qualify for tax subsidies to help pay for their premiums, you know, those are the people that we got to be looking at. Should we be raising the level a little bit? Should we be looking at why it's particularly hard on the people suffering hardships? Yeah, we should. And that's what I think we ought to roll up our sleeves and get together to work on. My hope is that, you know, the Republicans passed the AHCA, which basically eliminates the Medicaid expansion, in my view, endangering the local and community and rural hospitals. And there's some irony to that, because a lot of the people that voted for that policy are the ones in the rural areas. I think a lot of that, and this is just my speculation, but a lot of that is just, look, we Republicans made a campaign promise to repeal Obamacare. Now we did it. So I'm kind of hoping that, well, they got it out of their system now. And then let's all get together and work together on it. And, you know, we're here in the Lehigh Valley, and my brother, Congressman Charlie Dent, is right next door to my district, and I think that's his attitude too. He's willing to work together and sort out the problems. But so I'm here to say, yeah, there are some people who are having a hard time with the ACA, and I think we have to work together and make it better for everybody. What will happen to our Social Security and Medicare? What will happen to our senior housing programs? Okay, as I mentioned, one of the main priorities that I have as your member of Congress is to stand up for Social Security. I think it's a program that has worked since 1933. When I first ran, I called myself a Roosevelt Democrat, and that's one of the reasons. I like Social Security. I think it has worked for this country for many, many years. Now, of course, what's happening with Social Security is you have demographic waves. You have baby booms. And, you know, we're at the stage now where the baby boomers are retiring. They're stopping working, they're becoming pensioners, and they're drawing on the Social Security system. And so you have too few younger people supporting too many older people who are the baby boomers. You know, it's like a mushroom, you know. And so another thing people need to realize is, you ever hear politicians talk about the lockbox for Social Security? Like the money's in Fort Knox for Social Security? Guess what? Hate to burst your bubble, but there isn't. It's not in Fort Knox. Social Security checks are paid out with the money that's paid in currently. So it is the people who are working and paying into the system who are currently supporting the people drawing on the system. And that's the main problem. It's a problem of demography. Too many older people being supported by too few younger people. There are a number of solutions to that I support. Number one, I think we have to have comprehensive immigration reform because I want to make taxpayers of the people who are not properly paying into the system. And some are paying into it, but not enough, and some are not paying it at all. But there are people working in this country. They're undocumented, they're young, and they should be paying into the system so that we fix the mushroom problem. Number two, I support a bill called Social Security 2100, and it's something that my friend John Larson, a member of Congress from Connecticut, came up with. And it focuses on the amount of money paid in by an individual to Social Security. Now, if you're one of the people lucky enough to have seen this, you pay in for every paycheck, and if you get to the point where you have made more than about $120,000 in a year, then you stop paying. That's the cap. And there's a lucky few people in this country who hit that cap and then stop paying into Social Security. The idea behind, a lot of people say, well, just forget about the cap, raise the cap. Well, the bill that I am a proud co-sponsor of, Social Security 2100, doesn't do that exactly. It raises the cap a little bit, and then it stops until you get to about $400,000, and then you start paying in again, and there's no upper limit, so that people who can best afford continue to pay in to the system. And the accountants have scored this bill and have said that the doomsday date, you know about the doomsday date for Social Security and Medicare. They always tell, well, Social Security is going to run out of money in 2034. Well, first of all, it's not going to run out of money. It's going to go insolvent. And insolvent means you don't have 100 cents to pay for every dollar that you owe. So once they start paying 99 cents, that's insolvent. And number two, this is not a recent creature. They've been talking about the insolvency date for these programs for generations. Yes. And things affect it, like, you know, what's the interest rate doing, and how's the stock market doing, and what's the GDP. All of that affects what the insolvency date is. In point of fact, one of the reasons I like the ACA was it pushed Medicare's insolvency date back something like 11 years, which was a good thing. Well, the reason I like this Social Security 2100 bill is that it pushes the insolvency date for for Social Security back 75 years. Yeah, so I'm behind that, and
By then, all the baby boomers will be dead.
hopefully of natural causes. All right, next one. What will happen to our senior housing programs? Again, if you've seen the administration came out with a budget. And they came out with a budget, they called it the skinny budget, and it was just a set of principles, really. And then they doubled down on that, and they came out with a bound budget that basically reaffirmed all of those things. Cutting the EPA by 1/3. I mean, raise your hand if you don't care about clean air and clean water. Cutting low-income heating assistance, LIHEAP. Cutting programs that support Meals on Wheels. Cutting a lot of really popular and important programs in that budget. But I want you to take some comfort in this. And you know what? I'm going to quote my friend Charlie Dent again. Charlie and I both serve on the House Appropriations Committee. I worked very hard to get myself on that committee because it is very powerful. And Charlie said this, remember about the president's budget. The president proposes, but Congress disposes. In other words, Congress gets to decide what gets spent. And that's one of the reasons I'm very proud to serve on the Appropriations Committee, because you can rest assured you have a lot of sensible people on both sides of the aisles in that committee and making these decisions. My own personal speculation is that President Trump never really saw that budget.
Couldn't read it.
It's, and the reason I think that is because Mick Mulvaney is the director of Office of Management and Budget, and he's a right-wing, I mean, he's a fine person, okay, but his political ideology is right-wing, far-right ideologue, and wants to cut government no matter what and no matter who it hurts. And clearly, this budget has mixed fingerprints all over it. As I say, I don't think the Appropriations Committee is going to rubber stamp that. What actions can we, the citizens, best take to protect healthcare, public education, Social Security, food stamps, Medicaid, and immigrants? Well, I'm not going to separate them out, but I will say this. I've been in public service now for 4.5 years. It's the proudest thing that I've ever done. I'm humbled to do this job. I work for you, and I know it, and I don't put on airs, and anytime somebody has a problem, I want you to come to me, and I'm going to do my dead level best to help you no matter what. I got into this to help people, and I'm here to tell you, the best way to help yourselves as people is raise your voices. Raise your voices, because democracy works. I don't care if somebody else is trying to interfere with our elections. I don't care if somebody plays dirty politics. I know that there's too much money in politics. All of that is true, but it can never negate your voices. And so when we have things like the Citizens Climate March or the Million Woman March, people pay attention in Washington, and your voices are heard. So if you're worried about how to protect all of these programs, the number one thing for you to do is raise your voices and make yourself heard. What would happen to all the needy people and children if he stops food stamps? Yes, there are working people out there, but they don't get enough money to support everything. I know it is hard for them to make ends meet. Food stamps is now called SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. It is funded through the Agriculture Committee in the United States House. You have very committed people. It's funny, a lot of the people on the Ag Committee are from big cities. And you think, well, they know about farming. But what they know about farming is that there are people in the cities that rely on the SNAP program. And, well, I support it. And, again, I think that cooler heads will prevail, and though there are people like Mr. Mulvaney who want to eliminate that program, I think on balance the sensible people will win out and will preserve that program. Please give suggestions for the most effective ways to impact a legislator's position. I do not support the Republican agenda, and I want to change it. Wow. when you figure that out, give me my email address. Look, it's what I said before. Don't think that your voices mean nothing. There are some legislators that they wouldn't change no how, no way. I hope I'm not like that. I like to say I'm not a knee-jerk anything. I like to be a practical person. And I'm here to say there are a lot of Republicans that are the same way, and I think Charlie Dent is, and I think Leonard Lance is, and I like working with those guys. So don't assume that nobody's listening. Is it a good idea to contact congressmen from other districts to try to encourage them to support progressive causes? Yeah, I mean, it's going to have a little less effect when the member of Congress knows that you're not from his or her district. But there are people doing that. It's all part of raising your voice. You raise your voice, lots of different people hear. Is the Senate allowed to change the voting to 51 Senate votes to pass, or will McConnell continue it with 60 votes? I heard two different responses. Oh, it's you. Yeah, first of all, I don't work in the Senate, so don't blame me for all of their weird rules. They have this filibuster rule in the Senate. There's 100 senators, and the filibuster rule says that you have to get 60 votes to stop debate and close the debate. And they call that the cloture rule, because they're closing debate. And that has been the rule for time immemorial in the Senate, and the idea is that they're more balanced, and they're more bipartisan that way when they pass legislation. Of course, they abandon it from time to time, and they call that the nuclear option when they abandon it. And they exercise the nuclear option to confirm Judge Neil Gorsuch as a justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, but they didn't abandon that for regular legislation. And so, what did we just pass out of the House? The AHCA, Ryan Care, just passed out of the House. Very controversial, eliminates Medicaid. I saw a report that it will cause the closure of 300 rural and community hospitals in this country. Very controversial. I'm dead against it. It goes to the Senate now, and you've heard senators talking about it, and they're saying we're not even going to look at that. Republican senators have said that. I haven't heard that they're about to abandon the 60-vote rule for that.
Trump called for it this morning.
Pardon me?
Trump, number 45, called for it.
President Trump called for the, yeah. I'm not a betting man, except on occasion, but I doubt the Senate will abandon. I doubt that they will invoke the nuclear option to pass something as unpopular as the AHCA.
What about the budget?
Right. Don't get me started. All right. What do you use as a barometer for voting on a bill? On what premise do you make your decisions? Wow, that's a thoughtful question. When I vote on a bill, I think about my core principles. I think about how is this going to affect, I got this from Joe Biden, who's from Scranton. How does this affect the average person on the street living at home in Scranton? Or Wilson, or Easton, how does this affect regular people at home? And I like that formula. It has been working for me. Sometimes, you know, you vote on these things that have horrible titles. I mean, there'll be the Mom and Apple Pie Preservation Act. And you look at it, and it's about allowing polluters to pollute more. And you think, how dare they can name it whatever they want. And you'll say, well, how could Cartwright vote no on Mom and Apple Pie? Well, that's how. All right. How much power does Congress have to prevent the dismantling of the EPA and prevent repeal of environmental regulations? Okay. Congress has a lot of power. And you will hear me raising my voice over the next several months in the Appropriations Committee, clamoring to protect the Environmental Protection Agency. And you know, when you're talking to your friends and neighbors and relatives about this, I don't like to use the word regulation. I like to use the word protections. And I don't even like to use the word environment. I talk about clean air and clean water. That's what everybody wants. They want protections for clean air and clean water. And that's why I have introduced a lot of legislation to remove loopholes in clean air and clean water laws that go back to the 70s. There are loopholes for oil and gas drilling. Why do they need loopholes for oil and gas drilling? Like they're not likely to pollute anything? Yeah. Or like they don't have the money to comply with the same protections that every other industry complies with? That's my own point of view. I feel very strongly, that is a core value for me, for protecting clean air and clean water. And so I will be raising my voice on behalf of the protections for those things. Under the budget that's proposed, EPA gets cut by 31%, and it's pretty simple. When you slash the jobs of the people that are out there protecting your air and your water, your air and your water are going to get dirtier. Simple. If President Trump fulfills his promise to pull the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Accord, is that game over for U.S. climate action, or do you think there's a possibility that Congress will come to the rescue by passing legislation such as a fee on fuels that generate greenhouse gas emissions that can slow global warming and spare future generations from its calamitous effects? I had some hope that President Trump, he was saying some things about evolving on climate change. Climate, you pretty much have to be a science denier to deny that climate change is real. And it's a sad state of affairs when the U.S. has to take a back seat to all of the other developed nations of the world, including China, on this. And my own view is that our nation should be a leader in this and many other things. My own view is that the United States is a leader in the world, and the world is safer when we lead, whether it's on climate change or any other issue. And I worry that retracting and pulling back and engaging in isolationism will make this world a more dangerous place. And climate change is just one example of that. What can Congress do? Congress could do a lot, but the problem is the folks that worry about climate change are not in control of either the House or the Senate. So Congress change is something that I'm hoping for. But more than that, I want to say this. It's not just politicians and the public sector who talk about climate change and its calamitous effects. It's also the military. The leaders of the Navy know very well about extreme weather events escalating and increasing because of global warming. They have to plan for it. They have to think about what's going to happen to the fleets because of the extreme weather events. And the Army's the same way. I've heard this. And it's not just the military. It's also the private sector. Go on the websites of Fortune 500 corporations and look at how many of those corporations have taken green climate pledges. They understand that these changes are at work. They understand that people want them to be responsive to it. And in the end, I believe it's the private sector, it is the corporations, it is the business world that will bring those Republicans who are climate deniers into the fold. Because I'm a good little capitalist too, and I believe that the business community will help move that debate along in the correct direction. Somebody showed up with a typewritten question. I think I better answer that one. This is meant to be a serious question. In your opinion, what is Trump's end game? Destabilization of Europe / U.S. relations to aid Russia and his relationship with Putin. Gain personal wealth for himself and his family. Trying to establish an autocratic, fascist type of government. Aggrandizement for his narcissistic personality. Or
God,
is
I
this?
wish it was funny.
Or I did not write this. I want you to see. Or is this simply some type of reality show in his mind? I don't know. I don't know. Look, I was very concerned about that election and our selection of president. I was encouraged. I tend to be an optimist, and I was encouraged by his selection of some of the members of the cabinet.
Which?
For example, H.R. McMaster, who wrote a book called Dereliction of Duty, and he was talking about McNamara, Bob McNamara, the Secretary of Defense under President Johnson. And he was very critical of McNamara for not being truthful to Johnson about the huge uphill climb it would have been to actually win in Vietnam. In other words, H.R. McMaster is all about speaking truth to power. Man, was I encouraged when I read that about him, because that's the kind of people we need in the current administration.
But do you think he's doing it?
No.
They
That's a
don't,
big bomb.
the oral questions will come later. I don't know if he's doing it. They don't invite me over to the White House. The other one is Mad Dog Mattis. I mean, when you look to a guy named Mad Dog as the stabilizing influence. But I'm here to tell you, I take national security very, very seriously. I go to every single classified security briefing that they offer members of Congress. We go, Democrats and Republicans together, to a big auditorium, and we listen to people like that. And I heard General Mattis, and I'm satisfied that he's a sensible, practical, realistic person. So there are some rays of hope there. Voter turnout during the last primaries in Wilson Borough was between 8 and 12%. How do you intend to increase voter engagement, especially in these testing times? Why are not people voting? I refer you back to my earlier comment. Raise your voices, get engaged. Look, that million-woman march that they had in Washington, D.C., it made a tangible difference among Democrats and Republicans. You can just about feel it. The change in the attitude of people. Get out there and vote, and get out there and be heard. I can't stress that enough. And I would be really surprised in the current atmosphere if the turnout in any election is 8 to 12%. People are starting to realize how important it is to make your voices heard. And this is why I have town halls, to listen to you. Because that's what representation is, isn't it? Can you recommend a good source for non-false news? Disillusioned with the New York Times, reading Claude Taylor, Louise Mensch, looks like T-Pain, etc. These days. Whom do you trust? My advice when you're trying to sort out what's true and what's not true is to read a lot and listen a lot and talk to people and read books and don't rely on one source. I don't mean to shock you, but I'm a Democrat. And the TVs at home are not glued to MSNBC. They're not. In fact, a lot of days I don't like listening to that because you're getting one viewpoint. And I listen to Fox, and I listen to CNN, and I listen to the network news, and I read the New York Times and the Washington Post, and I read the Wall Street Journal, and USA Today. I think that the only way to get a fair sense of what the truth is to read as much as you can and listen to both sides on everything. I think it's the people that only have it glued to one station. They're the ones that are being misled. Okay. Are the protests around the nation having an effect on Trump's proposed budget? The answer is no, not on the budget as written, but on the response to it, absolutely. Absolutely. Now there are some districts, there's a lot of gerrymandering in this country, and the harder a district is gerrymandered, the less that member of Congress has to pay any attention to what's in the bills or what the people say at home, because they're always going to return either a Democrat or a Republican to that district. But there are an awful lot of other districts that are, that could go either way. And members of Congress, there's a lot of members of Congress that are listening to these protests, Democrats and Republicans, and they do have an effect. In fact, I can tell you that members of the Appropriations Committee specifically, I have seen members change their positions, members who were actually yelled at in town halls. Now, I'm not encouraging you to yell at me. But I've seen that happen. I'm not going to identify the member that changed his or her position, but I've seen it happen. Based on your interactions with your colleagues from the other side of the aisle, do you really think the GOP will actually adopt President Trump's draconian cuts to agencies such as EPA, Department of Education, and
PA-08.
oh, Department of Energy? Based on what I've seen, I think that they will enact some of them, but I think they will be more moderate. So, for example, EPA, instead of being cut 31%, it could take a 10% cut. That's just a guess. Stay tuned. Appropriation season is the summertime, and by the end of the summer, you're going to have answers to a lot of these things. Now remember, just because there's a budget and just because there's appropriation season doesn't mean things get decided. There are 12 subcommittees on appropriations. I'm on 2 of them, Commerce, Justice, and Science, and Financial Services, General Government. But there are 12 of them, and many a year has gone by when one or more of those committees was not able to pass its bill for funding that the departments that it's supposed to fund. For example, a couple of years ago, the Interior Department, which is charged with funding the national parks and Bureau of Indian Affairs, things like that, was unable to pass its. I mean, this is usually non-controversial, national parks. And you may remember this. A controversy bubbled up about whether gift shops in national parks would be allowed to sell trinkets bearing Confederate flags on them. And because over 100 Republican members of Congress voted no on that, because they couldn't get their amendment included, they voted no on passing the Interior Department's budget. And so that year, we went without passing a budget for the Interior Department. And so what happens? What happens is at the end of the year, any of this stuff that didn't pass, it gets pushed to the, you hear about fiscal cliffs. It gets pushed to the end of the year, and then they create what they call an omnibus. An omnibus budget is just one bill that funds the whole government. And basically, they push aside all of the little changes, and they just tinker with what they did last year a little bit, and then they say, okay, we got a budget, we're funded through next September. And that's what happens. I don't like that. I think that the committees ought to follow regular order, because when you do these omnibus things, I mean, they're huge, immense bills that it's really hard for everybody to get through them. We do the best we can, and what my staff is charged with doing is making sure the things in the 17th District that we care about don't get hurt. And we've been successful at that, but it's a dumb way to do business. Concern is deficit and sticking to the budget. My request is, since government has not performed the last 30 years, driving up a $20 trillion deficit, please propose Convention of States Article 5 Constitution and propose staying with budget and decreased deficit. Have states vote on the measure. Okay, that's a legitimate question and a legitimate concern. We cannot continue to drive up, and it's not, by the way, it's the terminology is important. The deficit is the annual shortfall. The debt is the $20 trillion item. That's the national debt. And we can't keep bumping it up. Now, it's okay to have a deficit and it's okay to have a debt. But when you let it climb up so high that the payments on the debt start to grow and grow and grow, and pretty soon you have to start cutting, all the programs we've been talking about tonight, because you've got to pay you got to pay the interest on the national debt, to the Chinese that are holding the debt, or whoever. Then it's hard to run a government, and it's hard to run a society. So I believe that it's the responsibility of the Congress to come to terms with this crippling national debt, and it's got to be a balanced approach. It's not just slashing programs, it's also raising revenue. And I have said all along that we ought to go back to the tax brackets that we had during the Bill Clinton presidency. Why do I say that? Because the last president of the United States who balanced a budget was Bill Clinton. Now pay attention here. I'm not giving all the credit to Bill Clinton. There was a lot of Republicans pushing hard for him to do it. But together, they got together and they did it with a combination of spending cuts and raising revenue. Why can't we do that again? It's not rocket science, and I think we have to. What will you do? What will you be doing to keep the $54 billion for the military from going there and redirecting it to the programs being cut? Diplomacy, food stamps, healthcare, Meals on Wheels, education, etc. Well, my own view is that I tend to agree that the military does need an increase in its budget. I'm not sure that it's $54 billion, and I don't want to see it come at the expense of these popular domestic programs. Again, what's driving this whole thing? What's driving it is the national debt and concern about the national debt. And so it goes back to the last question. If we go back to responsible tax rates, that's going to be a big part of the solution. But don't put me down as somebody that wants to deny increases to the military. In some cases, we need them. How do you plan on keeping immigrants safe from President Trump? Well, it remains to be seen what President Trump is going to do about deporting immigrants. I mean, he's made some statements that he intends to deport, 11 million souls from our shores. Not only is that impractical and uncaring and inhuman, but it's really, really expensive to do something like that. And again, what do I want to do? I want to make taxpayers out of those people. My Republican friends in Congress, you go into their offices, so many of them have, they have paraphernalia from universities in their districts, and then they have pictures of when they got sworn in, and then there's always, often, there's a corner, and over in that corner, there's the shrine to Ronald Reagan. I like Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan put amnesty into effect. I'm not for amnesty. I'm for a tough but fair path. They've got to pay a penalty. These are people that want to be here because this is the greatest nation on earth. We ought to be flattered by this, and we ought to take advantage of it to help us balance our budget and reduce our national debt and people our armed services and a lot of good things that I think they are ready, willing, and able to do. And I don't think we've heard the last from President Trump about what he intends to do. But that's why I think we've got to have comprehensive immigration. There is a white Ford Edge with its lights on in the parking lot. There's my favorite question of the night. Anybody have a white Ford Edge? All right, we're down to the last 3 questions here. If a freedom of religion bill was proposed that would give businesses the right to discriminate against those in the LGBT community, would you be against this? Yes. Would you stand up for equal rights for all? Yes. Easy question. In light of an assault on a journalist by a now elected representative from Montana, what are your thoughts about journalistic independence and freedom of the press? Well, it's funny that follows the so-called freedom of religion bill question, because it's the First Amendment in this country, and it guarantees free speech. And one of the 4 freedoms that Roosevelt talked about, and your freedom to stand up and give me a good solid face full here at the town hall if that's what you want to do. And we honor that here in America, don't we? It's one of the things that makes people want to come here and be American. And freedom of speech and freedom of religion, they're both in that same amendment, you know. We have a statue of Thomas Jefferson. It stands right outside the hall where I work in the House of Representatives. It's about 3 times life size, and I always look on it with reverence when I walk in there. Thomas Jefferson wrote his own epitaph. He wrote what's on his tombstone, you know. And he wrote 3 things. He was the author of the Declaration of Independence. He was the drafter of the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, and he was the founder of the University of Virginia. He wanted those 3 things on there, and that's what went on there. Imagine being the President of the United States and leaving that off your resume. That's how important that was to him, and it's important to me too, and I know it's important to all of us. We have to stand up and fight for freedom of the press and freedom of religion. These are the things that make us Americans, and we can never, ever forget it. By the way, regarding that gentleman from Montana, if you were up late that night and you heard his acceptance speech, he gave a very contrite and forthright apology. I have not met him yet, but I'm going to be giving him a second chance when I meet him. And the last question, what is your stance on medical malpractice tort reform? Also, what is the prospect of federal money increasing to medical residencies to expand them in hopes of reducing the doctor shortage? The second part I have to look into. I mean, when you say increasing federal money right now, that's a rare bird in anything you're talking about in Washington. Medical malpractice tort reform I am generally against. I trust juries. I think that if we can trust juries to decide life or death in criminal cases, we can leave it up to them to decide how much money gets awarded in civil cases of any kind. All right, I'm running. I'm gonna say I'll take 2 questions from the floor over here.
Hi. You talked about doing things for the good of all people, and I believe that's what most people want. I hear that you are supporting fracking, and to me, that is not a good thing. That is not doing what's best for all, since we all know that it poisons our water, it poisons our wells and poisons people. So I'm wondering why it is that you support that. I know it brings in jobs, but there's also green energy that can bring in just as many jobs. So that is my question. Why are you supporting that?
Well stated. Did everybody hear that?
Yes.
Okay. Number one, protecting the environment, protecting clean air and clean water is a core value for me, and that is why I spend so much time. I am vice chair of the Sustainable Energy and Environmental Caucus in the Congress. I started a political action committee raising money for the members of that caucus. I changed the bylaws of that caucus so that we can accept Republicans in it. I am cultivating companies to support that caucus as well. And it's clean air and clean water are things, and preventing climate change are things that I work on constantly. Now, as far as fracking, I am the author and sponsor of two bills called Cleaner and Fresher. And these bills eliminate the loopholes I told you about. Loopholes that exempt oil and gas extraction companies from the environmental laws, from the Clean Air and Clean Water Acts from the 1970s. So far, I'm getting a little traction, but not enough. I came into this office at a time when fracking had already taken hold in Pennsylvania, and so many jobs were being created in northeastern Pennsylvania that basically the horse was out of the barn. I support, right now, in the Delaware water gap, and the Delaware watershed area, that is considered a pristine waterway, and I support banning fracking in that area because it isn't there already. But as far as fracking, the other piece of it is this: we're not. You know how important it is for me, for this nation and this world, to move to renewable energy. Wind and solar is the future, but we aren't there yet. Right now, that is the clear trend, and is absolutely why I spend so much time fighting on behalf of renewable energy. It was a couple of years ago, we were able to force the Republicans to include a 5-year tax credit, investment tax credit, for both solar and wind investment. That was huge. It was something that they were pushing hard against, but we were able to secure that concession. So these are the things that I work on. In my view, I understand the leave it in the ground approach. I wish we could do that. But between the energy needs of this country and the fact that wind and solar are not there yet, I view natural gas from fracking as a stopgap. I understand that is not going to satisfy everybody, but that's where I am on the subject. Sir.
I have a question. The Congress supposed to be a check on the executive branch, and this question didn't come up, and there's a lot of talk about obstruction of justice, and it's pretty prima facie from what's been presented anyway. And that's the part one. Part two is someone in the White House having, if it's true, having covert direct communication with the Kremlin and a Moscow, and in a Russian embassy. I mean, those are two big things.
I never talked to the Russians.
Your opinion on those two topics.
Okay. Number one, I met Bob Mueller 4.5 years ago. At the time, he was still the head of the FBI. And I just got a good feeling about him then. Not a political guy. This guy's a lawman through and through. and he doesn't give a hoot about politics. And that's the kind of person we need doing this investigation. So I feel very comfortable with him there. As far as James Comey, one thing I kind of agree with President Trump about, James Comey is a showboat. When did we have FBI directors that were calling press conferences about presidential candidates? And I, in addition to the Appropriations Committee, I also serve on the Oversight Committee, and I had occasion to cross-examine James Comey. I don't know that I took the full measure of the man, but gosh, I think he and a lot of other people in the FBI are sharpening their knives for President Trump. And I think he has a lot of memos that he's dying to share with people. But how far it goes and whether it adds up to anything, I think it's too soon to say. There are people running around saying impeach him, lock him up.
Vaccine water.
Look, one thing I went to Washington to be is one of the grown-ups in the room, and I hope I'm doing that. And let's let the investigation run its course, and don't jump to conclusions. I know there's a lot of smoke there, but it doesn't necessarily mean there's fire.
Radar.
Okay? We're going to wrap it up, folks. Thanks for coming.
Our table is blocked.
Well, that's all you need to say.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
I'm for you.
Oh, good.
How's it going?
It's going well.
I just need 15 on that 11. What's that? I need 15 on that 11. On the meter? Minutes, yeah.
What I'm here for. The gentleman out there said he's here to get
I did.
I said I'm making you look better.
Trust me, that's what I was waiting for. That's the
That's all we
goal.
have to do is just.
And my dessert.
I know, I'm waiting for you guys to vote.
And yours.
One, I'm against fracking in the Delaware water. Absolutely have to prevent that from
So
changing.
does Richard Russell teach up at East Stroudsburg, the former state rep?
Boston
He was a
Missile
political science
regulation.
professor. He was in the state council. He was the advocate for turning Pennsylvania to a unicameral house like Nebraska, which is only one house in the state legislature.
Yeah, no,
Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act.
I haven't seen him. He
Safe
may
Drinking
be
Water Act.
somewhere, you know,
None of that
advisor or
applies to
something
oil
to
and
the
gas
program, but personally I haven't seen him.
That's crazy. Every other, I mean, this business right here has to comply with those things. Every other American business has to comply except oil and gas extraction.
Yeah, I don't understand how that
They
works.
can't afford to comply with federal regulations. No, oil and gas. Why be?
He wouldn't, you know, he wouldn't be able to do that today.
Well, we have a friend, Ellen.
Really.
Wells are already in place.
You know that.
Yeah. So they, any,
No, I
so in
mean, they're
Pennsylvania,
all
public
capped
water
wells.
is anything that was legally navigable. So it's like
County,
Susquehanna, the Delaware, the Lehigh.
Bradford County,
Little tributaries off, like Bushkill Creek is not navigable, so that's not.
Wyoming County.
Big Bushkill off the Poconos is, Little Bushkill isn't.
So, I mean, it was kind of a done deal.
What that means is that stream bed is owned by the Commonwealth, not by the landlord on either side. And there's a public easement up to the high water mark in the
And
spring.
these federal,
This was what, the
So
70s?
the river,
what they are.
the stream bed to the low water
Is
mark
the thing,
is owned by the state.
And the clean
Low
water.
water mark, the high water mark is public
Oil and
easement.
gas.
And above that's a private property owner. If it's a non-navigable stream,
I don't
the
care.
stream bed on one side owns to the middle of the stream, and the stream bed owns the other side. So you can have someone that allows people to fish on this side, but if you wade across the mid, you can't, you trespass. But because the state Department of Conservation of Natural Resources and the game commission, the Fish and Boat Commission, he never knew what called the navigable stream was. You know, who mapped it was the Department of Conservation of Natural Resources mapped it so that they could lease the land under the streams for drilling. And they've leased over 1,400 acres of stream bed to drill.
Yeah, no, I didn't even hear about that.
Of water?
Yeah.
That's,
I went, wait, I had never heard of that.
Here we go. Oh, that's better. Yeah, it's much better.
I know, you'll be all right.
I've walked around and told my kids for years, flip flops are good for now. Now I know.
But I always, I try to. Janet, I've taken some of the psychology classes, and
I didn't.
I was just in red, first magenta, and I was just like,
Right.
so I was just up there. But I just go,
Most people don't know the gas on
what was that?
the gas on the box, Montgomery, the Highbury, and Holstein.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, the formation up north is the Marcellus Shale, and below that's the Utica Shale. Down here, the South Newark Basin is under the Delaware River. That state moratorium was drilling the South Newark Basin, which expires in January.
That can be regulated and it should be regulated. No, the thing is, that even if I didn't want these regulations, there's no one ordered.
I know. We have to win the majority back. Democrats.
They're leaving you to be, barbaric, I think.
Yeah.
Washington and inherit them. Until we do that, nothing that you said today is gonna happen. Another thing.
So, would you like to, or would you be sorry about that?
Sorry about not running it back.
Can I get one?
Oh, I'll take a picture of you.
Let's go stand in front of the balloon. You gotta wrap yourself in the flag if you're gonna be caught.
Became dissatisfied with that, so I wanted to work on that. So I set up a panel of 20 people in healthcare, doctors, CEOs of hospitals, healthcare insurance people, patient advocacy groups.
The bulk of my lending now working with the Department of Healthcare operators.
So what I did was, I set up a quick form. This will take you 20 minutes.
You were
Get
breaking
on the computer, Google me, go to my official health website. There's a form on there that asks for your experience with ACA. And I want you to fill that out and hit send. It'll go to this panel, and we're gonna end up with, a book full of, I'm hoping for a few hundred.
I fly to South East Asia every day because my flight, my hotel, and the procedure is cheaper to get this done.
I actually have.
Write that down. 'Cause I'm honestly, I'm gonna forget that. But you write that down, and that'll go into consideration by the panel. We do that?
The other concern, you always say,
They were within 3 months.
you know, quality.
And then 3 months, they told us why.
Why isn't it a penalty for being married in this country? If you look at all the IRS code, it says, these new taxes kick in if you make 200,000, 250 if you're married.
Yeah,
Why is it not
the
400,000?
marriage
Why do you
penalty.
say, but not marriage penalty, the marriage penalty was taken away, but still, the tax code and many other codes, and many other codified laws in the US say, if you're an individual, new taxes kick in at this point. If you're married, new taxes don't kick in at that times 2, it kicks in like that times 1.25. Why are you saying one spouse is worth a quarter of what the other spouse is? If 2 people, like for example, I have friends who are gay. Two guys, they just live together. They're not going to do a civil union because if they do a civil union, they start getting hit on the taxes at $250 instead of $400.
Right. Yeah, another Coke, please. How's that chicken?
It's a little dry, but it's good. I like mine
Can I
spicy.
some of that chicken?
Sure.
Thank you.
Be right back.
So that's a concern there, is you look, it's maybe for equality all over. The fact of the matter is, there's different pieces in the legislation that don't address that. You know, you're gonna say, hey, we want to get paid the same thing, I'm all for that, okay? I want people paid based upon what they do, rather than minimum wage, because think about it, you were a lawyer, right? You probably took a lot of jobs that paid $0 an hour, called internships. Okay, why can somebody take a job for $0 an hour, but an employer can't pay somebody $3 an hour to do something that's not worth 7 or 15?
And so,
I mean, look at the number of people who,
him,
like you and I,
president, to do too
that
much?
work for nothing to get where we are.
listen, 8 years from now, or
I mean, if you really want to have a minimum wage, do those internships,
Oh, please.
including in Congress.
we could be all sending a different tune.
I mean, put your
So
money
we
where your
have
mouth
to-
is.
We have to look at it as.
I've been saying that actually. I've been saying what I'd like to see
You know, you
is
don't.
a living
Yes,
wage.
that's exactly right.
Once
I-
you're
It
at,
won't work, you don't know anything about
I mean,
economics.
you're gonna let me finish your sentence?
Go ahead, sorry.
Okay.
He's a disruptor.
What-
I've looked at it.
I'm
He's a disruptor.
telling you, I
All
get
the
your
things,
point. Is
sometimes
that
change was
it
He's
doesn't
tearing
make
things down
sense to be
slowly.
forcing employers to pay a living wage. The people that aren't expecting to make a living wage because they're still in their kind of apprenticeship, and they're so young they don't have families, and they don't expect to be raising families when they're 19 or 20 or 21. But they want to get the experience.
Don't get
And if you're
started
going to
there.
prevent them from getting a foot in the door by telling employers you can only pay $15 an hour, that doesn't work. I get that. I mean, we all do.
But my thing is, he is not.
So the idea is
Where my,
you got to create an exception for, you know, young people in apprenticeships or an internship, or some, you know, learning role. And I would be for that.
Just let it be what it is. If the employer can't hire somebody at the wage they want, then they have to raise it. You know, free markets work. We look at Pennsylvania. We both live in Pennsylvania. The state liquor store system had a $114 million loss in the fiscal year with a monopoly. They have a friggin' monopoly. They don't have to compete with anybody, and they have a $114 million loss since last fiscal year. That just shows you government does not most efficient. Free markets are much more efficient than controlled markets.
Oh, I'm a good little capitalist.
I am too.
And there's a lot of things the government is lousy at, and you won't get an argument from me.
Most
on
things.
that. Well, I mean, you need the government to build dams and build interstate highways and things like
I work
that.
for GE Capital. We finance those, a lot of those hydroelectric dams that had the turbines in them. You know, GE Finance, GE Equipment, GE Energy Finance does all of that. In fact, Adam Lanza's father was the guy in charge of the tax group there. I knew his father when I was working there. You know that it is.
Yeah.
So,
Are you
as
with GE Capital now?
no, I did a 4-year project for them.
Where are you working now?
I have my own businesses.
You have a business card?
No, I don't do anything you need.
Oh.
I do mostly work, risk management work. We do a lot of digital forensics for hospitals, supporting defense of EEOC, medical malpractice cases. I also do risk management, business continuity. I also do banking compliance, regulatory compliance. But it's all small stuff, just enough for me to make what I need to make. And the least I make, the less you can steal from me. I have my nest egg put away. It's sitting there. It's growing in Roth IRAs that will not be taxed again when I draw the money out. And when my mom passes, I move from the East Coast to my place in Jackson, Wyoming, where there's a state that has no corporate or personal income tax. And even better, it's got dynasty trust laws that allow me to pass family wealth down for 1,000 years without paying federal estate taxes.
Where do you live now?
Forks.
Talk to
I
me.
have 2 more questions for you.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
So you're a lawyer, so you understand the incorporation doctrine?
Sure.
Okay. So the First and Fourth Amendment have been incorporated. In 2010, the Second Amendment has been incorporated. So you represent a state where Article 1, Section 20 of the state constitution says citizens have the right to bear arms in defense of themselves and the state. This right shall not be questioned, much stronger than the federal law. Since the Second Amendment's been incorporated, how come I can't go 2 block seats with a sidearm without getting arrested? I mean, I can go across that bridge and my First Amendment rights don't go away, my Fourth Amendment rights go away. And even though the Second Amendment's been fully incorporated by the U.S. Supreme Court through the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, which should bring the Equal Protection Clause in, how come we have to pass a federal law, for national concealed carry reciprocity, and how come you're not supporting it, especially when your constituents have a much stronger right at the state level than they do at the federal level? Why should I have to spend money? For me, I have a carry permit in Pennsylvania. but I can't carry in every state because of reciprocity, because some states require training, Pennsylvania doesn't require training.
Right.
So I have to get a Utah non-resident. That combination allows me to carry in 38 states. If I want to carry in South Carolina, I got to spend money on a Florida non-resident. Why do I not have to, like, if I want to publish a newspaper in every state, I don't have to get a license. If I want to practice my religion in every state, don't have to get a license. If I go into different states and get pulled over, I still have the same Fourth Amendment rights. These are incorporated rights, civil rights protected through the Equal Protection Clause. How hard is it to support national concealed carry reciprocity?
I was just talking to Karen at the house about, she's got a concealed carry permit. And, funny, we were just talking about.
I go over that bridge, minimum mandatory 3.5 years. If I go across that bridge. With one. One last.
And I think
Share
it's hard
Act.
to split, but it is, yeah.
I'm
It's
not
like
sure
a
it's
sleight of
his
hand.
plan.
We're just handling the Share Act.
I think Outlet's gonna.
I do a lot of time recreating out west. In fact, when I go to DEF CON, which is the big hacker convention in Vegas, we actually use federal ranges for that. When we have our shoot with all the other hackers and information security professionals. My house in Wyoming is surrounded by federal lands.
There's about four or five different bills called the Share Act.
This is the one that includes all the range protections, taking the silencers off the National Firearms Act. My hearing's horrible because I used to shoot convention.
Mine is horrible too.
Yeah.
I'm against I just, I mean, just man to man, I'll tell you. I don't like it because it would take, like, for example, Steve Scalise's shooting.
And
You know the one I'm talking about?
yeah, crazy people do crazy things. Other people don't have to give their rights up because crazy people do crazy things.
I'm going to ask you to give me the courtesy of finishing my sentence.
I was born in America. I don't think
It would have taken law enforcement officers longer to locate the shooter if they put it here safely where the gun shots are coming from.
Look at Fort Hood, a civilian officer off the base to neutralize the shooter. Because you're members of the military, we're not allowed to carry the military guns. I mean, they can carry a gun to protect the
Stay with me on the Scalise shooting, and you refute that. Anyway, I'm a gun owner, and I shoot, and I have hearing protection. I put the things in my canal, and I put the over-ear protection.
So you ear protection when you go deer hunting?
No.
So how am I supposed to hear something going through a woods? And I can't hear the suppressor on the rifle.
I guess we're going to agree to disagree on the Share Act.
Okay, that's fine. I appreciate it, but here's the other thing to think about. I'm very good friends with Cody Wilson, who started Defense Distributed, who did the 3D printed handgun, and the CNC mills that finished 80% of the receivers. I'll tell you what I'm hearing through my lawyer friends that work in that thing, and I'm friends with Alan Gurr and stuff. Keep your eye on the bill that's going to hit the Congress to remove bump fire stocks. Because your party wants it gone, but it's going to have national concealed carry reciprocity amendment.
I'll look for that. No, I'm glad you told me about that.
Because what's going to happen is the strategy right now is to amend.
We have to.
No problem. Is to amend concealed carry bill to the bump stock.
No, I might be able to help you.
I would. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just trying to charge of moving them around, trying to get to everybody.